What if the only thing standing between you and the life you actually want is a story you keep telling yourself? Not your circumstances, not your background, not your resources. Just a quiet, convincing little lie that whispers, "That's too much for someone like me." If you've ever made yourself smaller to fit inside what you thought was possible, if you've ever killed a dream before it even had a chance to breathe, then stop what you're doing right now, because this story is going to hit you somewhere deep. There was a man named David, 32 years old, living in a small town, running a tiny convenience store his father had left him, and honestly, he was okay with that. His dad had drilled one philosophy into him his entire life: be realistic. Don't reach too high. A small, steady business beats a big, risky dream. So David lived by that. Customers would suggest he expand, and he'd just smile and shake his head. His wife Sarah would show him articles about people who started with nothing and built empires, and David would wave it off every single time. Those people are different. They've got education, money, connections. We're just ordinary people. But here's the thing about David. Late at night, after the store closed and the lights went dim, he'd stand at that window and stare at the empty lot right next door. Big enough to build something 3 times the size of what he had. And for just a moment, he'd let himself imagine it. Wider aisles, more products, maybe even a little cafe where neighbors could pull up a chair and actually connect. He could see it so clearly, and then, like clockwork, the voice would come. "Who are you kidding? You can barely handle this little shop." And just like that, he'd lock the door, go home, and bury it. Sarah saw what David refused to see. She saw a man with genuine talent, real dedication, and a gift for making people feel welcome. She saw someone who could build something extraordinary. But every time she brought it up, David had the same answer. "We're doing fine, Sarah. Why risk what we have for something we might not even achieve? Let's just be grateful for steady and small." And what David didn't realize, what he couldn't see yet, was that he wasn't thinking small because he was being realistic. He was thinking small because he was terrified. Then one autumn, the world stopped waiting for David to be ready. A massive supermarket chain announced they were opening up 2 blocks away. Modern, efficient, lower prices, enormous selection. And within 3 months, David's customer traffic had dropped by 50%. People he'd known for years, people who had walked through his door for decades, were now walking right past him to get to that supermarket. "Sorry, David, it's just more convenient." He stood behind his counter watching the hours drag by, his savings shrinking, his bills stacking up. The little store his father built was dying right in front of him. One evening, after the worst sales day in 15 years, David locked up early. He sat down on the floor behind the counter, put his head in his hands, and whispered to nobody, "I should have grown when I had the chance." For the first time in his life, the truth landed on him like a freight train. Thinking small hadn't kept him safe. It had left him completely defenseless. Sarah found him there an hour later. She sat beside him without saying a word. Then quietly she said, "There's someone I think you need to talk to. Mr. Chun, the man who built that electronics chain across the state. He grew up right here in this town. He started with less than you have." David looked up. "Why would someone like that want to talk to someone like me?" Sarah didn't flinch. "Because 30 years ago, he was exactly where you are right now. And someone helped him see differently." David didn't sleep that night. But before sunrise, he made a decision that scared him more than anything else he'd ever done. He was going to ask for help. 3 days later, David stepped into Mr. Chun's office on the 20th floor of a downtown building, higher up than he'd ever been in his life. Through those massive windows, he could see his entire town spread out below. Looking strangely small from up there, Mr. Chun was in his 60s, dressed simply, with the kind of calm eyes that have seen both real failure and real triumph. He gestured to a chair. "Sit down, David. Sarah told me about your situation." David sat. "Mr. Chun, I honestly don't know why I'm here. My store is failing, and I'm not the kind of person who builds big things. Mr. Chun smiled gently. I said the exact same thing about myself once. He walked to the window. Come here, look out. David stood beside him, and the view was breathtaking. You see that building over there? Mr. Chun pointed to a tall structure in the distance. 20 years ago, that was nothing but an empty lot, dirt and weeds. Someone stood there and said, I'm going to build something. And they did. You know what made that possible? David shook his head. One decision. They decided to think bigger than the empty lot. Mr. Chun walked to his desk and picked up 2 glass containers, a small cup and a large vase. He filled the cup with water. This, he said, is what happens when you think small. The water fills it up immediately. It feels safe, contained, but it can never become more than this. He poured the water from the cup into the vase. It barely covered the bottom. Now watch. He filled the vase completely to the top. When you think big, the same effort, the same water, it has room to expand, to grow, to become something magnificent. He looked directly at David. You think your small store is your limit. But David, the store isn't the limit. Your thinking is the limit. The question isn't, can I do something big? The question is, what if you stop telling yourself you can't? Most people don't fail because they aim too high and miss. They fail because they aim too low and hit. They spend their whole lives building small, safe things, never once realizing they had the capacity for greatness. David felt something crack open inside his chest. A wall he'd spent 32 years building. But Mr. Chun, he said quietly, what if I try and fail? What if I'm just not capable? Mr. Chun put a hand on his shoulder. David, I learned this the hard way. The pain of regret for never trying is far worse than the pain of trying and failing, because failure teaches you something. Regret just haunts you. You don't need to know how to build the whole empire today. You just need to decide right now that you're willing to think beyond the small cup. David left that office with his mind on fire. That night, he and Sarah stayed up until 3 in the morning. Not worrying, planning. What if they didn't just save the store? What if they completely transformed it? What if they created something no corporate supermarket chain could ever replicate? Not lower prices, but genuine human connection. A place where people actually wanted to be, not just a place they had to stop at. The next morning, David called the owner of the empty lot next door. The guy had been trying to sell it for 2 years. David made an offer, risky, ambitious, and terrifying. It wiped out every dollar of his savings and required a loan that made his hands literally shake when he signed the papers. But he signed them. Within 2 weeks, construction began. David expanded the store to 3 times its original size. But he didn't just make it bigger, he made it completely different. He added a small cafe where neighbors could gather every morning. He created a community board where local artists could display their work. He set up a corner for local farmers to sell fresh produce. People told him he was out of his mind. David, you're going up against a giant. This is never going to work. And for the first time, David smiled and said, maybe, but I'd rather try something big and fail than succeed at staying small. The first month was brutal. Construction costs blew past his budget. Equipment broke down. Permits got delayed. There were nights David lay awake, questioning every single choice he'd made. But every time the doubt crept in, he came back to the same image, a vase and water with room to grow. He kept going. And slowly, something remarkable started happening. The cafe became the town's go-to morning spot. The farmer's corner pulled in people craving something fresh and personal. The community board filled up with local art, event announcements, and neighborhood connection. People stopped coming just to grab groceries. They came because they wanted to belong somewhere. 3 months after the grand opening, David's store was busier than it had been in 30 years. Not because it was bigger than the supermarket. It wasn't. but because it was built with big thinking and a human touch that no chain store on earth could manufacture. 6 months later, David invited Mr. Chun to come see it. Mr. Chun walked through slowly, taking in the bustling cafe, the farmer's corner, the artwork on the walls, the customers laughing with each other like old friends. He turned to David, and there were tears in his eyes. "You didn't just save a store, David. You built a community." David smiled. "You taught me something I'll never forget. The size of my life was always determined by the size of my thinking. I was living in a small cup when I could have had the whole vase." Mr. Chun nodded. "You were always capable. You just needed permission to believe it." Today, David mentors 3 young business owners in that same town. And when they come to him with small, safe, shrunk-down plans, he asks them the same question that changed his life. What if you stop telling yourself you can't? Here's what I need you to hear right now. David's story isn't really about a convenience store. It's about every dream you've quietly made smaller so it would fit inside your fear. Every goal you've downgraded to match your doubt. Every vision you walked away from because some voice, maybe your own, convinced you that you weren't enough. Your potential has never been the problem. Your thinking about your potential is the problem. The size of your thinking determines the size of your results, and small thinking creates small results, even when you're reworking your absolute hardest. You don't need to know how to achieve the big vision today. You just need to be willing to believe it as possible, because the how always reveals itself to the people who are brave enough to ask what if, and regret. Regret for never trying will follow you for the rest of your life. At least failure teaches you something. Regret just whispers, what if, until your very last day. So here is your challenge. Think about one area of your life where you've been thinking way too small. Your career, your relationships, your health, your creative work, something. Now ask yourself this one question. If I knew I absolutely could not fail, what would I go after? Write it down. Don't judge it. Don't shrink it. Write the big, audacious, full-scale version, because you are not limited by your circumstances. You are limited by your willingness to think beyond them. And starting today, you can choose the vase instead of the cup. If this story hit home for you, hit that like button and share this with one person in your life who needs permission to stop playing small. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's the one big vision you're done shrinking? What are you finally going after at full scale? Let's build something here. A community of people who flat out refuse to think small. I'll be back next week with another story to keep you moving forward. Until then, remember this. Your life is only as big as your thinking. The vase is waiting. Go fill it.